Republican Senator Lindsey Graham says the outcome of former President Donald Trump's upcoming second impeachment trial is, quote, not really in doubt. Republicans believe the Senate lacks the authority to try a president who is no longer in office. Last month, the House approved a single article of impeachment charging Mr. Trump with incitement of insurrection. Elise Preston explains what to expect.
Lawmakers on Capitol Hill are set to be jurors and prosecutors this week as former President Donald Trump's Senate impeachment trial begins Tuesday. He's accused of inciting the deadly Capitol riot on January 6th.
Now, the Senate must honor their oath and impeach Donald J. Trump to hold him accountable, but also to bar him from running for public office ever again.
That is unlikely to happen. Dozens of GOP senators have challenged the constitutionality of impeaching a now private citizen. And with a two-thirds vote required to convict, Mr. Trump will likely be acquitted.
Zero chance of conviction. 45 Republicans have said it's not even a legitimate proceeding, so it's really over before it starts.
In a 14-page pretrial memo, Trump's attorneys also argue the constitutionality of the proceedings, while denying his remarks are what sparked a violent mob to swarm and rush the Capitol last month. 9 Democratic Congress members will serve as prosecutors, known as impeachment managers.
Let's turn to the impeachment trial.
In an exclusive sit-down with CBS Evening News anchor Norah O'Donnell, President Joe Biden addressed the upcoming trial.
I ran like hell to defeat him because I thought he was unfit to be president. I've watched what everybody else watched, what happened when that crew invaded the United States Congress. But I'm not in the Senate now. I'll let the Senate make that decision.
The former commander-in-chief is not expected to testify under oath. Elise Preston, CBS News, New York.
So let us bring in Kenneth Davis to take a look back into the history of impeachment. He's a historian and New York Times bestselling author of Don't Know Much About History. Well, we're about to find out some of the stuff we don't know. Thanks for joining us. My first question to you is to sort of bring it back to the original document, right? The Constitution. It's kind of a three-parter. Why did the framers of the Constitution decide that they needed this power, the power to impeach the president and certain other officials? How did they agree on which crimes would be impeachable? And I'm also curious about is removal from office and barring from serving in the future, are those the only two punishments that are available?
Good morning, Anne-Marie and Vlad. It's a great pleasure to be with you. And I have my Constitution by my side, as I usually do. First part, the framers of the Constitution, 1787, meeting in Philadelphia, knew they needed some way to get rid of a leader who was corrupt, incompetent, immoral, had done something reprehensible. Otherwise, as Benjamin Franklin warned them, the only antidote to such a person would be assassination. So they turned to a piece of old British law, and much of the American Constitution was based on British law, well-established British law, and impeachment was the term they came up with. Then they used this phrase that we're all familiar with now, bribery, treason, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. It's a kind of all-purpose charge that can be used and has been used throughout history because it depends on a vote in the House of Representatives to determine what is impeachable. What we have is a definition that Gerald Ford, who later became president, provided. An impeachable offense is anything that a majority of the House of Representatives decides it is. So that's where we are. Now, the Constitution also provides two aspects to what happens to the impeached and convicted person. And it's not only a president. This applies to civil officers and members of the cabinet, as well as justices have been impeached. So this is a much broader than just a president. Removal from office requires for the president a conviction in the Senate of 2/3. That's a high bar, and they did that very deliberately. But it also then goes on to say that in addition to being removed from office, this is a secondary clause, the president or an official could be barred from ever holding office, and that's a simple majority vote. So there are some questions here that we've never really explored before. As with a lot of things in American history, they're on the Constitution, but there aren't always precedents. I can say there is a precedent for removing someone, impeaching someone who is no longer in office. That happened to a cabinet member during the Grant administration. He was impeached and then resigned quickly before he could be tried, but his trial went ahead.
So, Kenneth, as you know, former President Trump has become the third American president to have been impeached and tried in the Senate. Of course, he will hold the distinction of being the only American president impeached twice. But you had the impeachment trials of President Johnson, Andrew Johnson, and, of course, Bill Clinton. They were both acquitted. Andrew Johnson was not very well liked on both sides of the aisle. President Clinton was very well liked by Democrats. So I'm curious what your impression is of the bar for conviction. In other words, you had one president who was not, who didn't have a lot of supporters and a lot of fans in the country. Another one who did have, up until his impeachment, was fairly popular, President Clinton, if people don't recall. So how high is that bar to convict?
It's a very high bar. And again, the framers wanted to set that bar high because they knew that the Congress essentially was going to overturn the will of the people. The people had presumably elected the president through the Electoral College, of course, and they didn't think that this should be just a simple majority, because then we'd just be in a constant situation of presidents being impeached and perhaps removed for political reasons rather than the reasons stated in the Constitution. This very, very serious collection of crimes, somewhat ill-defined, but still very serious. They didn't want the Congress to be able to simply override the will of the people. So that's why the bar is set very high, and certainly one of the reasons why no president has yet been convicted in the Senate. In fact, the first time a member of the impeached president's party voted against him at all was with President Trump. Senator Romney, of course, voted for his conviction, but by joining the Democrats. It was the first time a member of the president's party, the impeached president's party, had voted for conviction.
So if the bar is particularly high, then I wonder why the framers made the impeachable offenses, to me anyways, the phrasing so vague. It seems like they were leaving a lot sort of open-ended to be influenced by politics. And even though we use a lot of phrases that sound like sort of legal phrases, like a trial, and normally there would be a justice presiding over it and that sort of thing, it's really a political endeavor and not a judicial endeavor. Why do you suppose it seemed open-ended about what could be an impeachable offense?
Well, I think that they didn't want to, in their wisdom, they wanted to signify what they clearly specified bribery and treason. The phrase other high crimes and misdemeanors, again, comes from old British law, and it was meant to be somewhat all-inclusive because they didn't want to say the president can be impeached for only these things. They are leaving open the possibility that a president or some other high official could do something that was clearly illegal or detrimental to the government without specifying what those things are. So it is somewhat open-ended, but I think that more than 230 years have proved that the system has essentially worked. We haven't had every president being impeached simply because the other party thought he did something they didn't like. Otherwise, we'd never have a president who isn't impeached. And there have also been cases, obviously, of presidents who did things that reached impeachable levels. Richard Nixon, of course, was going to be impeached, for the Watergate crimes, including obstruction of justice, and resigned before he was actually impeached. Many people thought that the Iran-Contra situation during the Reagan presidency rose to impeachable levels, but there you had a question of an extremely popular president, and even though there were very harsh judgments against President Reagan for the Iran-Contra deal, in which guns were traded, arms were given to hostages, and then guns were given to rebels in South America, Central America, against the congressional law, clearly rose to the impeachable level. But President Reagan's popularity prevented that from happening.
Kenneth Davis, author of the Don't Know Much About History series of books. Well, today we know a little bit more. Thanks to you, my friend. Appreciate it as always.
A pleasure. We're all getting some civics lessons these days, and we need them.
We really do. Thanks, Kenneth.
Yes.